Imagine a world so ancient that history itself has forgotten it. A time when the earth still pulsed with a vibrant, primal force, where the first rays of creation's dawn bathed a young humanity, unburdened by the weight of ages. The air was pure, untouched by the breath of cities and the sigh of machines. The waters ran free and clear, reflecting a sky that seemed eternal. This was the world before the flood, a place of vast plains, majestic mountains, and lush forests. Men and women lived for centuries, witnessing generations intertwine in a slow, continuous dance. It was a time where knowledge expanded, but wisdom still struggled to take root. Rivers snaked through fertile lands, nourishing civilizations that flourished and spread like the gardens they planted. But there was something profound and unsettling in this world. Beneath the surface of beauty and order, ancient and invisible forces began to stir. There were whispers on the winds, signs in the stars that men could not decipher. It was a time of peace, but a peace tinged with a subtle sense of fragility. It was as if the very fabric of creation was being stretched, slowly approaching a breaking point. This is the world where our story begins. A world of greatness, but also of growing shadows. The stage was set, the tragedy slowly being woven into the depths of consciousness, and even the wisest could not foresee what was to come. The earth, in its early days, was like a freshly painted canvas, each color still vivid, each stroke resplendent with purpose. Everything was in perfect harmony. The creatures that walked the land and swam in the seas lived in an almost instinctive balance with the world around them. There was none of today's rush, nor the weariness that marks the faces of modern men. The seasons alternated without chaos, and the fruits of the earth sprang forth generously, as if creation itself longed to nurture its inhabitants. And the first men, they were different. Born from the hands of a creator with great wisdom, they possessed a deep connection with nature and the divine. Their bodies were strong, and their spirits luminous. They lived for hundreds of years, witnessing the passage of ages as one watches the long, steady flow of a river. They were masters of the lands they inhabited, but not tyrants. In their hearts, there was still a remnant of Eden's purity, a flame of original simplicity that connected them with all that was beautiful and good. Nature responded to humanity with a generosity that is hard to imagine. There was no scarcity. The forests were full of life, and the waters flowed abundantly. The cycle of life followed its gentle rhythm, and man, unlike today, was not seen as an invader of the earth, but as a caretaker. Every tree that swayed in the wind, every stone in the riverbed seemed to be in communion with humans, as if all were pieces of a great divine puzzle, perfectly fitted together. In this period, humanity still experienced an innate harmony with the cosmos. Stars shone above their heads like silent guides, and the skies were not just a distant expanse but a canvas of signs, veiled messages that few could interpret. The winds carried ancient songs, and the nights were filled with the soft murmur of a creation that, in that moment, still smiled upon its inhabitants. But this harmony, though beautiful, was fragile. The same flame that burned within men also carried the potential to consume them. And what began as a perfect relationship between humanity and the world around them was about to be tested in ways that no one could have predicted. And the men, blessed with longevity that today would seem mythical, lived for centuries, watching the world change slowly around them. Their eyes witnessed the rise of entire generations. They saw their children's children grow, flourish, and ultimately meet the same fate as all living things. The passage of time was not felt with the same urgency, but with the patience of those who knew they had countless years to accomplish what they desired. These long lives were not just a blessing, but also a disguised curse. Longevity granted them knowledge and experience, but also a sense of power and invulnerability that slowly planted seeds of arrogance. Men and women who lived for more than 800, 900 years, began to see themselves not just as mere creatures of the earth, but as masters of everything around them. At first, this longevity was an opportunity to create, to build, and to learn. But as time passed, this gift seemed to distance man from his true nature. Those who once walked humbly now began to question the purpose of their long lives. What else was there to conquer? What new horizons could they explore? The hands that once shaped the earth with respect began to shape it with ambition. The spirit of cooperation that once united communities slowly dissolved, replaced by an ever-deepening desire to leave their mark, to prove they were something more than mere mortals. And in this search for meaning, humanity began to change. It wasn't just their bodies that remained youthful for centuries, it was their very spirit that did not bow to old age. The desire for power, for control, and for eternity grew in their hearts. They began to create vast cities, great works that defied nature instead of coexisting with it. Knowledge, once a tool for understanding and harmony, slowly became a weapon. What had once been used to heal and cultivate was now used to control and dominate. The earth, though still generous, began to feel the weight of these new human desires. Forests were cut down to make way for immense constructions, and rivers that once ran freely were diverted to serve man's whims. There was progress, yes, but also a growing sense of disconnection. And the more humanity advanced in its quest for greatness, the farther it drifted from that primordial bond that once tied it to the world in perfect harmony. Longevity, once seen as a blessing, was now beginning to show its darker side. For living so long without limits also brought the temptation to forget that, at their core, they were still mortal. The flame of life, once balanced, began to burn more intensely, consuming everything around it with insatiable ambition. As the centuries passed, humanity began to achieve levels of advancement that even the boldest dreams of their ancestors could not have imagined. Cities, once modest, transformed into vast centers of power, with towers that seemed to touch the heavens and technologies that, to modern eyes, would be indistinguishable from magic. Material progress accelerated at a dizzying pace. The arts, science, and engineering flourished at a rate never before seen. The civilizations of this era developed ways of manipulating natural resources in ways that would be considered impossible today. They used metals with precision and wisdom, built colossal structures with materials believed to have unique properties, and even the climate, according to stories, could be influenced by some of the wisest among them. Lost accounts suggest that these ancient men possessed a deep understanding of energy in nature, knowledge that escapes us today, like sand slipping through our fingers. However, as their material achievements grew, something essential seemed to be unraveling. The pride these advances fostered was as imposing as the works of their hands. The greatness they built around them was accompanied by an ever-growing sense of self-sufficiency, an arrogance that led many to believe they could reach the gods themselves, or perhaps even become gods. Life in these great centers of civilization was marked by a luxury that only the most powerful could enjoy. The elites lived surrounded by unimaginable wealth, indulging in endless feasts, bathing in perfumed waters, and adorning themselves with the rarest metals and gemstones. The streets of the cities were bustling and vibrant, with merchants, artisans, and scholars. It was a time of excess. But what many did not realize was that amid such opulence, the true essence of humanity was slowly being eroded. As power increased, compassion diminished. Rulers began to exploit the weaker, and slavery, in its many forms, became common. Inequality grew drastically, and the divide between rich and poor deepened more than ever before. Those who controlled the secrets of science and magic guarded their knowledge fiercely, fueling the thirst for control and domination. And as civilization expanded, it also became more fragile. Prosperity led to hedonism and carelessness. The advances that had once been used to improve people's lives were now used to impose fear and ensure the supremacy of a few. Where once there was curiosity and exploration, there was now a race to accumulate more power. And at the heart of these cities, where once there had been harmony, there was now turmoil, dissonance, and a growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong. Material progress had its price. And although the world still gleamed with human achievements, the shadows of their excesses were beginning to lengthen, and an invisible but growing darkness crept into every corner of civilization. What was coming would be more than a simple course correction, it would be a violent and inevitable rebirth, a rupture as vast as the abyss that humanity had dug between itself and the natural order. But with all the brilliance and splendor, something deep and dark began to take hold of human hearts. Material progress brought with it a moral decay that spread like an invisible plague. The cities, once bastions of knowledge and culture, began to rot from within. Life had become a constant spectacle of superficial pleasures, but behind the curtains of gold and endless feasts, the soul of humanity was slowly unraveling. The values that had once sustained the first men, respect, harmony, humility, began to crumble. What had once been sacred became profane, and what was honorable was now a subject of ridicule. Justice, which had once guided collective life, was turned into an instrument to guarantee the dominance of the powerful over the weak. And in the place of wisdom, there was now cunning, in the place of virtue, there was unbridled ambition. Moral corruption manifested itself in disturbing ways. Violence, once rare, became commonplace. Murders, betrayals, deceptions, and bloody disputes over material goods became the new normal. What had once been unimaginable, brother killing brother, the abuse of the innocent, unchecked greed, now happened without restraint, without remorse, without any shadow of regret. Carnal pleasures also became an obsession. Men and women indulged in uncontrollable excesses, exploring their deepest desires without limits. What began as a pursuit of pleasure soon became a spiritual prison, a decay that dragged humanity into an abyss with no bottom. The body was exalted, but the soul was ignored. And as men sank deeper into their own lust, their disconnection from the divine became increasingly evident. These were times of endless feasts, of grand excesses, but also of deep desolation. The elders, those who still remembered the days of simplicity, looked with horror at what the world had become. The nights were filled with laughter echoing through the streets, but also with the stifled cries of despair. Hearts had grown hardened, blind to the pain they were causing to the world and to themselves. Selfishness took root. Men who had once shared the fruit of the land with their neighbors now hoarded for themselves, even if it meant the hunger of others. The brotherhood that had once united humanity in its early days was disappearing quickly. Now, each sought only what was theirs, regardless of the cost to others. The bonds that had once connected humanity to nature, to the divine, and to one another were being torn apart. And in the void that opened, corruption deepened, with no one to stop it. The world, which had once vibrated with life and harmony, was becoming a shadow of its former self. What had once been a garden of delights now seemed like a land ravaged by the pride and indifference of men. And so, as men drowned in their own corruption, the earth, silent and patient, began to whisper warnings. The balance was on the brink of collapse, and what was to come would be the inevitable response to a humanity that had forgotten its place in the order of things. But what many did not know, or preferred to ignore, was that something far more disturbing was stirring in the shadows of this corrupted world. Ancient stories speak of beings who walked among men, figures of superhuman stature and power, who would soon be known as the Nephilim. They were not mere mortals, they were said to be descendants of a forbidden union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. These beings, tall and powerful, endowed with strength and intelligence beyond human capacity, began to multiply on earth. They became leaders, kings, fearsome warriors, and their influence spread like wildfire. With their powers and abilities beyond human comprehension, they built empires, commanded armies, and subjugated entire nations. Their presence was as feared as it was revered, and many men began to worship them as gods, bowing before them as if they were the legitimate rulers of creation. But the Nephilim did not bring with them the peace or wisdom that many had hoped for. On the contrary, they intensified the corruption already present in the hearts of men. Wherever they ruled, violence, cruelty, and depravity grew. Their cities gleamed with riches, but they were built on the suffering of the weak. Their thrones were erected amidst blood and bones, for where there was resistance, the Nephilim crushed any opposition without mercy. These beings, who were supposed to be half divine, showed no trace of the goodness or justice that one would associate with the heavens. Instead, they embodied the darkest aspects of humanity, greed, pride, and an insatiable thirst for power. And under their influence, men began to fall even deeper into their own moral abyss. The Nephilim encouraged excess, glorified violence, and led humanity further away from any hope of redemption. Accounts say that these giants were not content merely to rule over men, they also delighted in manipulating the natural world itself. They studied the deepest secrets of creation, playing with the primordial forces of life and death. They conducted dark experiments, manipulating creatures, mixing species, corrupting the divine order. They saw themselves as superior, capable of shaping the world's destiny according to their whims. And over time, the chaos that the Nephilim brought to earth was not only visible in the cities they ruled but also in the very fabric of reality. Natural laws began to distort. What was once harmonious began to disintegrate, as if creation itself was being corroded from within. Animals and plants no longer thrived as before, and strange phenomena began to happen more frequently: violent storms, sudden changes in climate, plagues that spread without warning. The influence of the Nephilim, like a poison, permeated the world, and their presence was a constant reminder that humanity had crossed a dangerous line. They were not just a physical threat but the living embodiment of what happens when sacred boundaries are crossed. The harmony that had once existed was being torn apart, and the planet itself seemed to feel it. The balance was in tatters, and the signs that something cataclysmic was approaching were everywhere, for those with eyes to see. But most were blind, or perhaps simply chose not to see. As the world sank deeper into darkness and chaos, something even more painful was happening on the spiritual plane. The relationship between humanity and the divine, once so close, began to disintegrate. The Creator, who had established a deep bond with his sons and daughters on earth, now watched with growing sorrow as the connection with him faded. The world he had intended to reflect his goodness was becoming a distorted mirror of ambition, corruption, and cruelty. Slowly, the prayers of men became rare and empty. What had once been sincere cries of gratitude and humility had now turned into murmurs without meaning, or often, nothing at all. The altars that should have been dedicated to the true God were replaced by monuments to men themselves or, worse still, to the Nephilim. Genuine worship gave way to idolatry, to the cult of power and the glorification of flesh and blood. The spiritual covenants that had kept the earth in balance, once nourished by faith and obedience, began to weaken. The blessings that had once flowed freely over the world began to dry up. The connection with the divine, which had always been a source of guidance and protection, was being severed by humanity's own choices. Men, in their arrogance, believed they could walk alone, that their technological advances and their grand cities were proof of their independence. But, in reality, they were becoming more and more isolated from what truly mattered. And God, ever patient, waited. He had not entirely abandoned the world, though men seemed to have forgotten him. His eyes were still upon the earth, his heart still yearning for reconciliation. But with every act of violence, with every false worship, the distance between them grew. What had once been a direct line between heaven and earth was now a fragile and nearly invisible thread. There were a few who still turned to the Creator, their voices like distant echoes in a world that preferred to ignore them. These remaining souls quietly mourned the corruption around them. They prayed, even though their words seemed lost amidst the growing noise of chaos. These few knew that something was changing, that divine discontent could not be ignored forever. They felt in their hearts that the Creator's patience was running out. In the heavens, signs began to appear, small to most, but unmistakable to those who still sought the truth. Stars moved in unusual ways, inexplicable storms swept across entire regions, and the earth occasionally trembled, as if it were crying out in agony. The Creator, in his wisdom, knew that humanity had strayed so far that something great would be necessary to bring them back, something that could purify the world of its corruption and restore the broken balance. But despite these signs, the majority remained blind. They continued their lives as always, immersed in temporary pleasures, in wars for power, and in vain ambitions. The divine warning was present, but few had ears to hear it. The days of God's long patience were coming to an end, and soon he would make a decision that would change the course of history forever. The world, unaware, was slowly walking toward a fate that no one could avoid. What had begun as a world of harmony and beauty was about to become the stage for an inevitable purification. And it was then, in the midst of this growing decadence, that the warnings began to emerge, like whispers in a storm. Among humanity, a solitary figure arose, someone who, even amidst the chaos, still kept his heart pure before the Creator. His name was Noah. He was an ordinary man, but with extraordinary faith, one of the few who still heard God's voice amid the turmoil and the relentless noise of the world. Noah lived his life simply, far from the corrupt cities and the excesses of the Nephilim. While the world around him sank into decadence, he maintained his integrity, guided by the ancient wisdom of his ancestors, preserving a relationship of reverence with creation and the Creator. And it was to him that God spoke, quietly, amid the chaos of the earth. God saw in Noah a hope, a flame that still burned in a world where the light was nearly extinguished. And it was to this man that he revealed his plan. A flood, a devastating flood, was coming. The Creator, with sorrow in his heart, had decided to purify the world. He could no longer allow corruption and wickedness to reign unchecked. The earth needed a new beginning, a rebirth that would wash away iniquities and restore the lost balance. Noah heard the divine warning with sacred fear. God told him to build an ark, an immense vessel that could shelter his family and a pair of every living creature. This ark would be a refuge during the impending cataclysm, a symbol of God's mercy amid destruction. Noah, though he did not fully understand the magnitude of what was to come, obeyed. He began to work, day by day, piece by piece, building something that no one else could even imagine. As Noah built, he also spoke. He tried to warn those around him of the coming judgment, trying to awaken them from their apathy and despair. He spoke of the Creator, of the impending flood, of the need for repentance. But his words fell on deaf ears. People mocked him, laughed at his seriousness, questioned his sanity. The ark, to them, was a joke, the delusion of an old and foolish man. The Nephilim, powerful and arrogant, despised Noah and his warning. They were the giants of the earth, untouchable and invincible in their own perception. How could a mere storm topple the power they had built over the centuries? To them, Noah was just another of many fanatics, someone who did not understand the true nature of strength and power. They continued their feasts, their wars, their profane experiments, without paying any heed to the words of the man who, silently, continued to prepare his ark. Men, blinded by pride and decadence, could not see the truth before their eyes. Noah, in his solitude, felt the weight of his mission. He knew that time was running out. The skies, once so calm and blue, now seemed heavier, as if the very air was preparing for a cataclysmic transformation. The warnings were everywhere, but most chose to ignore them. And as the construction of the ark neared completion, the days of judgment also drew near. The Creator had given humanity time, one last chance to turn to Him, but the choice was still theirs. Few listened, and fewer still repented. The sound of Noah's hammers continued to echo through the valley, a constant reminder of what was to come. And although laughter and indifference still prevailed, there was a growing sense that something was about to happen, something that would change everything forever. The days passed, and Noah's ark finally stood tall, massive and imposing, a strange and solitary contrast in the midst of a corrupted world. Noah and his family worked tirelessly to complete the final details. Gradually, as if guided by an invisible force, the animals began to appear. From all corners of the earth, they arrived in pairs, lions and lambs, eagles and doves, great and small, walking side by side, as if instinctively knowing that this place would be their refuge. For many, this scene was incomprehensible; for others, it was just another curiosity that would soon be forgotten. Those who witnessed the construction of the ark and the influx of animals continued to mock. Human pride blinded them. Even in the face of something so extraordinary, they refused to believe that their lives of excess and arrogance were about to end. What flood? They laughed. What judgment? They asked with disdain. They were so immersed in their own sense of invulnerability that they could not, or would not, see the increasingly clear signs around them. Laughter and indifference echoed through the cities and villages. The parties continued, the banquet stretched late into the nights, and the power struggles grew fiercer. The Nephilim, in particular, despised any notion of an impending judgment. To them, the ark was madness, a useless construction erected by a man who, in their limited view, did not understand the true nature of strength. They, who believed themselves almost divine, were convinced that nothing, not even a flood, could threaten their reign over the earth. And then, on an ordinary day, without any extraordinary warning, something began to change. The clouds, once floating peacefully, began to gather. The air, which had seemed vibrant with the life of the earth, was now filled with a palpable tension. The wind, once gentle, grew stronger, more relentless. The first drops of rain fell, small and quiet but steady. Noah and his family entered the ark, closing its massive doors behind them. Still, the world outside continued to ignore what was happening. The first rains were met with laughter, as if they were merely the prelude to a common storm. But then, the waters began to rise. The sky, once blue and open, darkened, as if the very windows of the heavens had been opened. And the rain, once timid, began to fall in torrents. Rivers and lakes overflowed, fields were quickly flooded, and the streets of the great cities became violent, unpredictable waterways. Now, indifference gave way to panic. The laughter was replaced by screams. Men and women ran to the mountains, to the tallest trees, trying to escape the rapidly rising waters. The Nephilim, in their arrogance, still attempted to fight against the unstoppable force of nature, but not even their great stature and power could save them. The world they believed they controlled was turning against them, and none of their grand deeds could protect them from the judgment that had arrived. The cities, built with such pride, were swept away by the waters. Palaces and temples collapsed, great towers fell like sandcastles. People clung to each other in desperation, begging for mercy, but it was too late. The destruction was relentless, a continuous roar that swallowed everything in its path. Inside the ark, Noah and his family felt the waves crashing against the wooden walls as the world outside succumbed to the flood. The earth was being purified, swept clean by the force of the waters. What remained of a corrupted civilization was disappearing, sinking into the unfathomable depths of a furious sea. Judgment had come, and the world they knew was being irreversibly transformed. And then, the world fell silent. After days of relentless rain and the constant roar of the waters, the flood finally subsided. The sound of the raging torrents was replaced by a deep, almost supernatural silence. The ocean that now covered the earth was vast and endless, a somber reflection of a judgment that had consumed everything known. Where once stood majestic mountains, lush forests, and cities full of life, there was now only the vast expanse of water, a disquieting stillness, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Inside the ark, Noah and his family waited, suspended between destruction and the promise of a new beginning. The vessel, now adrift on an endless sea, floated with the fate of life within its depths. There was no land in sight, only the liquid expanse stretching beyond the horizon. Noah knew, however, that one day the waters would recede, and the earth, now purified, would begin to regenerate under the Creator's design. The days dragged on, turning into weeks. The ark was their refuge, a silent and damp sanctuary where the future of humanity and the creatures of the earth rested, waiting. Noah, with unwavering faith, prayed quietly, waiting for the divine signal that would announce that the flood had fulfilled its purpose. The animals, with an unusual patience, also seemed to know that they were waiting for something grand, a new opportunity to begin, on a reborn earth. Then, one day, the sound of the rain ceased completely. The waters, which had seemed endless, began to calm, to recede slowly but visibly. The ark, now at rest, swayed gently on the waters as the silence became even more palpable. The light of the sun finally broke through the dark clouds that had covered the sky for so long. The soft, golden glow illuminated the vast expanse of water, as if the Creator himself was once again smiling upon the earth. After what seemed like an eternity, Noah, in his quiet hope, released a raven. It flew over the waters but found only vastness, with no place to land. Days later, he released a dove, and it returned with a sign of life, a fresh, green olive leaf. It was the first indication that the earth was beginning to breathe again, that nature was rising from the depths. Finally, the waters receded enough for the ark to rest on a mountain. Noah, his family, and the animals, after months of confinement, began to emerge. The earth they found was different, a blank slate, ready to be rewritten. The air was clean, the horizon free from the scars left by the old civilization. Everything was fresh, as if the planet had been washed of its sorrows, purified for a new beginning. Noah built an altar to the Creator, offering sacrifices of gratitude. The scent of the incense rose to the heavens, and God, in His mercy, made an eternal promise: never again would He destroy the earth with a flood. He sealed this covenant with a rainbow, a bridge of light between heaven and earth, a sign of hope and renewal. It was a pact of peace, a promise that, despite human failings, the Creator would always be present, guiding and sustaining the world on its path. The flood had passed, and what remained was a reborn world, a planet that, though marked by the tragedy of destruction, was now ready for a new chapter. Noah and his family were tasked with repopulating this new world, replanting its seeds, and restarting humanity's journey with hearts turned toward God. Life, despite everything, had survived. And in that vast silence, where there had once been chaos, there was now a quiet promise, of rebirth, of hope, and of a future that, though uncertain, carried with it the Creator's blessing. The cycle had closed, and the earth, renewed and at peace, awaited its new story to be written.